Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 1196, Vajra Arts and Imperial Elixir. Han Li faltered upon hearing this. A hint of befuddlement flashed through his eyes, and he couldn't comprehend why the endless sky beast was saying this. This cultivation art originates from Buddhist origins, but it's something that everyone uses in the spirit realm. It's even more popular than the basic cultivation arts of the 5 elements used by qi condensation cultivators, the small child explained. Everyone uses this cultivation art? Could it be that you're also referring to? Han Li was starting to read between the lines, and a hint of surprise appeared on his face. This Buddhist cultivation art can even be used by mortals in the spirit realm who possess no spiritual roots. If a mortal reaches the 3rd layer or above in this cultivation art, then obtains some special weapons, they'll even be able to combat low-grade cultivators and demon beasts. If they can reach the 5th layer or above, even mid-grade cultivators and demon beasts wouldn't dare to mess with them for no good reason. Then, the small child chuckled coldly. Han Li was flabbergasted to hear this, and only after a long while did he respond in an incredulous manner. Surely you jest, fellow Daoist Endless Sky. You're telling me that mortals can combat us cultivators? You haven't ascended to the spirit realm yet, so there's no point for me tell you too much about it. But this is something that I wouldn't mind disclosing to you. In the spirit realm, the mortals are an extremely important force in the human race. Furthermore, there were some exceptionally intellectually endowed figures among the mortals who studied some basic cultivation arts used by cultivators and demon beasts, and managed to discover ways to refine their own bodies using the spiritual qi from their environment without having to rely on spiritual roots. In the end, they managed to devise a unique set of cultivation principles. There are even some particularly outstanding warriors among the mortals who have slain high-grade cultivators and demon beasts. This is not something that's uncommon in the spirit realm. The cultivation art I'm referring to is known as the Vajra arts, and it's one of the cultivation arts used most regularly among the mortals. Even so, surely mortals still can't compare with cultivators. After all, the vast majority of cultivation arts and treasures are still unusable to them, Han Li countered with furrowed brows. Of course. Mortals are still mortals in the end, and no matter how powerful they become, without spiritual roots, they're still unable to pursue the great Tao. Their lifespans reach a mere 100 years, and even if they can obtain some treasures or medicines that can extend their lifespans, it'll only give them 100 more years to live at most. That's their maximal limit. However, in the spirit realm, the postnatal acquirement of spiritual roots is possible. Among the 3 human sovereigns, the heavenly Yuan Holy Sovereign was once an extremely prominent and renowned mortal. Only after encountering a miraculous opportunity was he able to attain a spiritual root and become a cultivator, but in terms of power and abilities, he's not inferior to his other 2 counterparts at all. The small child's expression became rather solemn as he spoke. Han Li stroked his chin and was at a loss for words. Don't think too much about this matter. The mortals in the spirit realm are only able to achieve all of this due to the fact that the spiritual qi density in the spirit realm is far superior to that of lower realms. Your human world has endured a devilish tribulation long ago, and the spiritual qi density here is far inferior compared to the other lower realms. Even if mortals were to obtain the cultivation arts from the spirit realm that I mentioned, they wouldn't be able to absorb the world's origin qi into their bodies anyway, so there's no way that they'd be able to cultivate, the small child explained. Other lower realms? Does that mean there are more lower realms than just the human world? Han Li was very surprised to hear this. A peculiar look appeared on the small child's face as he said, "Of course. There are hundreds, if not over 1,000 lower realms beneath our spirit realm. All of the most exceptional cultivators from these lower realms would ascend to the spirit realm, and barely any have ascended from the human world in the past years. However, there have been many cultivators ascending from other lower realms that haven't been invaded by elder devils. I decided to send my avatar to the human world, firstly, because the spiritual qi is very sparse here. That makes it more difficult for my avatar to descend into this realm, but it makes it easier for me to avoid my great tribulation. Secondly, this is a realm dominated by the human race, so no one would suspect that I would send my avatar to this realm. Otherwise, if my enemies were to learn my backup plan and destroy this avatar of mine, all of my efforts would have been in vain. Han Li was speechless once again. He had always thought that the human world was a unique existence, which was why the spirit realm had gone to the effort of deploying cultivators into the human world to combat the invasion of the elder devils. However, after hearing the Endless Sky Beast's words, it was clear that there were other factors behind that decision. All right, that's enough about the spirit realm. It won't benefit you to learn too much about it for now. Let's talk about the Vajra arts first. This cultivation art can be used even by mortals without spiritual roots, but it's also renowned in the spirit realm for being extremely difficult to cultivate. There are very few people who can reach the 3rd layer, let alone the 5th layer. Most of the mortals in the spirit realm have only reached the 1st layer, which will somewhat enhance their bodies, but the effects won't be very useful. Reaching the 2nd layer of the cultivation art requires the cleansing of the marrow, which is an excruciating process that not many people can withstand. However, there are many mortals within the spirit realm, and reaching the 2nd layer would allow one to become as powerful a low-grade demon beast, so there are always some who are willing and able to endure the painful process. I've never heard of your bright jade arts, but I'm sure it's very much related to this cultivation art. After all, there are only a handful of Buddhist body refinement cultivation arts, and this is most likely the only one among those cultivation arts that can be used in the human world. The small child was very confident in his judgment. Han Li also felt like that was a very plausible notion, and he nodded as he said, "Perhaps that's true. It's indeed been rather difficult for me to cultivate the bright jade arts. Give me a jade slip, I'll give you a copy of the Vajra arts for you to examine. If it's the same cultivation art as your bright jade arts, then it won't do you much good, but if they're not the same thing, you can choose one between them to cultivate." The small child was suddenly being very generous. I'll have to thank you in advance then, fellow Daoist Endless Sky. Han Li certainly wasn't going to decline such a tempting offer. A faint smile appeared on his face, and he flipped his hand over to produce a jade slip before tossing it to the small child. The Endless Sky Beast caught the jade slip before slowly closing his eyes to replicate the cultivation art. The smile on Han Li's face faded, and his brows furrowed as memories of a copper plate and another cultivation art surfaced in his mind. They were none other than the Sacred Provenance Plate, as well as the heaven-bearing devil arts that he had obtained from Manhuzi. There was nothing to be said about the Sacred Provenance Plate. He was already certain that this demonic cultivation art and the bright jade arts had both originated from the Elder Devil realm. Furthermore, they were, respectively, the cultivation art required to unleash the technique, and the mandatory basic body refinement cultivation art. Unfortunately, there was a missing link in the middle, and that was the cultivation art for the transformation ability. When he had obtained the heaven-bearing devil arts from Manhuzi, he had only inspected it briefly before ascertaining that this cultivation art was that missing link. He didn't know how it had become a top-grade devilish art, but that didn't really matter. What was important was that he had somehow gathered the complete set of cultivation arts. Furthermore, the fact that the 9 Gale transformations that Han Li wanted to cultivate required progression in the bright jade arts made him feel as if there was some kind of profound greater power at work, trying to make him cultivate the Sacred Provenance Plate. A series of thoughts flashed through Han Li's mind, and after about 10 minutes, the small child sitting atop the cauldron suddenly opened his eyes before raising a hand, sending a burst of yellow light flying toward Han Li. Han Li immediately swept a sleeve through the air, catching the yellow light to reveal the jade slip within. "The cultivation art has been recorded in there, you can have a look at it first," the small child said in a calm voice. Han Li nodded and immediately seeped his spiritual sense into the jade slip to examine the cultivation art within. After just a short while, Han Li heaved a faint sigh and withdrew his spiritual sense. The small child's expression remained unchanged as he asked in an indifferent manner, "Is the same as your bright jade arts?" Han Li was silent for a moment before replying, "It is. There are some additional spiritual chi absorption methods detailed in the Vajra arts, but everything else is completely identical." The small child seemed to have expected this result, and he waved the aged hide book in his hand as he said, "That's settled, then. If you want to cultivate the 9 Gale transformations, you'll have to progress to the third layer of the bright jade arts first. During that time, I'll alter the 9 gale transformations so it becomes suitable for you to use. The thunderstorm wings are only a pair of treasures, and not real wings, after all, so some adjustments to the cultivation art will be required. Don't forget that you promised to lend me the golden jade tome after this. Han Li smiled and pointed to the 3 container treasures before him as he said, "Rest assured, fellow Daoist Endless Sky, I won't go back on my word. Before we begin, are you not going to consume any more of this imperial elixir?" The small child glanced at the treasures before shaking his head as he replied, "The imperial elixir is indeed a fantastic medicine. It can help demon beasts develop intelligence, and is of the utmost importance for demon beasts going through metamorphosis to attain a human form. For human cultivators, consumption of the imperial elixir can also expand the meridians and greatly enhance the body. However, it's not advisable to consume too much of it at once, and it can't be stored for more than a month, so it's currently useless to me. Seeing as you're planning to cultivate the bright jade arts, this will be quite useful for you. If that's the case, then I'll be taking these for myself." Han Li smiled as he swept a sleeve through the air, in which the bowl and the jade vial disappeared in unison, leaving only the gourd remaining on the ground. He then made a hand seal and a faint light shimmered in his eyes. All of a sudden, silver light flashed from beside one of the walls of the secret chamber, and another Han Li appeared out of thin air. As soon as this Han Li appeared in the secret chamber, it immediately feigned a grabbing motion toward the gourd lying on the ground. The treasure was instantly sucked into his grasp, and silver light flashed again as Han Li disappeared into the wall. A hint of surprise appeared on the small child's face upon seeing this, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he merely cupped his fist toward Han Li as a salute before also vanishing into the cauldron. Han Li took a glance at the jade slip in his hand before joining his palms, upon which the jade slip disappeared. He then slowly closed his eyes and began to meditate in a seated position. Almost at the exact same moment, a streak of silver light shot forth from the main peak that Han Li's cave abode was situated on. Following a few flashes, the silver streak of light had already disappeared into a certain restricted area within the drifting cloud sect. Not long after that, the streak of silver light flew out from within the restricted area again and returned to the interconnected peaks. Han Li continued to remain in the secret chamber, yet during this time, a streak of silver light would occasionally fly out from his cave abode before disappearing into the distance. However, the streak of silver light would always return to the interconnected peaks following intervals of several days to around a month, and no one knew what it was up to. Time passed in a flash, and 2 years flew by in the blink of an eye. Chapter 1196.5 Grand Marriage. Mu Peeling was standing outside one of the dozen or so guest pavilions within the drifting cloud sect, and she would occasionally glance up into the distant sky. All of a sudden, azure light flashed from afar before flying through the air, descending before this pavilion in the blink of an eye. As soon Han Li arrived in front of the pavilion, Mu Peeling made her way over to him, and whispered, "Mu Peeling pays her respects to her lord. The ghost spirit sect cultivators are currently resting within the pavilion, and the other 2 women are in that building over there." Han Li glanced at the pavilion behind Mu Peeling, then at another nearby building, and he nodded with a calm expression as he said, "All right, you can go now." Mu Peeling extended a respectful curtsy before flying away as a streak of white light. Han Li's body swayed, and he appeared at the entrance to the pavilion. He swept his spiritual sense through the interior of the building before walking in an unhurried manner. Within the hall on the first floor of the pavilion, there were 2 men and a woman sitting together while discussing something. One of the men was a stickly thin yellow-robed man, while the other was an elderly man with abnormally pale features. Their female counterpart was a beautiful young woman who appeared to be around 20 years of age. She was none other than Xianxia. The 3 of them were currently locked in a heated discussion, and the urgency in their eyes was quite apparent. As Han Li stepped into the hall, all 3 of them immediately turned to him in unison. They then rose to their feet with expressions of surprise and elation to welcome Han Li. Before the 3 of them had a chance to say anything, Han Li abruptly appeared on a wooden chair across from them. He waved a nonchalant hand, and said, "There's no need for formalities, fellow Taoists. Let's all take a seat. None of the three were able to identify how he had approached them so quickly. The elderly man's heart jolted upon seeing this, but he quickly put on a smile as he nodded in response. Thus, the three of them sat down again. Han Li examined the young woman, who had become even more beautiful since their last encounter, and a smile appeared on his face as he said, "Long time no see, Fairy Yang, you've finally reached the nascent soul stage. We'll be able to refer to one another as equals now." This woman was none other than the #1 female cultivator among the younger generation in the state of Yu. She had also successfully reached the nascent soul stage. "Thank you for your kind words, fellow Daoist Han. I've only recently reached the nascent soul stage, yet you're already the #1 cultivator in the Heavenly South region. How can I possibly compare to you? I've come here with a request for your help, Brother Han." Xianxia examined Han Li carefully as a complex expression appeared on her beautiful features. Han Li smiled, yet gave no reply. He cast his gaze toward the other two ghost spirit sect elders, and his eyes rested on the face of the elderly man in the end. "This fellow Daoist is Elder Zhong, right? I recall seeing you once from afar in the Devilfall Valley. I didn't think that Brother Han would still remember someone like me. I'm very flattered." The elderly man gave a slightly awkward chuckle upon hearing this. The ghost spirit sect seems to be in a very perilous situation at the moment. All three of you are important figures in the sect, so why have you come all this way to meet me rather than remain in the state of you to protect the sect? Han Li cut straight to the time. Upon seeing Han Li's no-nonsense approach, Xianxia and the others looked at one another with hesitant expressions, as if they were unsure of how to proceed. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as a hint of displeasure appeared on his face. Han Li's attention naturally didn't escape the notice of the trio, and the hearts of the two men jolted as they turned toward Xianxia in unison. Xianxia hesitated momentarily before breaking the tense silence. "Fellow Daoist Han, we've come here to request assistance from your sect, no, from yourself. We hope that you can assist our ghost spirit sect during this time of crisis. Otherwise, our sect will most likely cease to exist in the near future. You want me to lend you my assistance?" Han Li raised his eyebrows as a hint of a deriding sneer appeared on his face. "I know that our sect has wronged you in the past, Brother Han, but sect leader Wang was the one who was solely responsible for that incident, and he passed away in the Devilfall Valley long ago. The ghost spirit sect is not being ruled over by the Wang family anymore," the yellow-robed man hurriedly explained. "Is that so? I seem to have heard that Wang Chan is still thriving at your sect, is that correct?" Han Li asked expressionlessly. The expressions of both the elderly man and Xianxia changed slightly upon seeing this. The yellow-robed man was also quite surprised that Han Li was aware of this detail, but he still maintained his smile as he replied, "Rest assured, Brother Han, Martial nephew Wang Chan made a huge mistake a while ago, so he's been stripped of his role as an enforcement elder, and is currently been held in our sect's repentance cave to repent over his mistakes. He won't be released from there for at least another 100 years. Repenting over his mistakes? I don't think I've seen you before, but you seem to bear a resemblance to Fairy Yang. May I ask for your name, fellow Daoist?" Han Li was slightly surprised to hear this, but he cast his gaze toward Xianxia, then back at the yellow-robed man, and a thought seemed to have occurred to him as a faint smile appeared on his face. The yellow-robed man hesitated momentarily before replying truthfully, "You really do have a good eye, Brother Han. I'm also from the Yang family. I'm one of Yanga's uncles." Xianxia also nodded to confirm this notion. Han Li stroked his chin and asked in a meaningful voice, "Oh, so the Yang family has two nascent soul cultivators now. In that case, the Yang family must be ruling over the ghost spirit sect at present, right?" The yellow-robed man glanced at Elder Zhong before replying hesitantly, It's not incorrect to say that, but that duty has only fallen to our Yang family upon Senior Martial Brother Zhong's insistence. Senior Martial Brother Wang and the others were clearly unfit to rule over the sect, so it's only natural that the Yang family should rise to the occasion," the elderly man said with a wry smile. "Oh, is that so?" Han Li said in an absent-minded manner before he fell silent, and his eyes narrowed in contemplation. The three cultivators from the ghost spirit sect didn't dare to rush Han Li, so they could only sit in silence. Xianxia seemed to be contemplating something as well, while the two men were feeling extremely uneasy. Han Li was currently the #1 cultivator in the Heavenly South region, and he had once had a vendetta against their ghost spirit sect. The circumstances had changed since then, so it was very unlikely that Han Li would seek revenge against them, but they would definitely be lying if they said they weren't concerned in the slightest about being in Han Li's presence. If it weren't for the fact that the ghost spirit sect had truly reached the end of the road, they wouldn't have mustered up the courage to visit the drifting cloud sect. The only person in the entire Heavenly South region capable of saving them was Han Li. Their enemies were wary of the other great cultivators as well, but there was certainly no one more powerful and intimidating than Han Li in the Heavenly South region. Even if those past events had never taken place, what makes you think that I'll help your ghost spirit sect? Han Li asked in a slightly cold voice. Xianxia immediately turned to Han Li upon hearing this, while the two men with her were ecstatic. The three of them could all hear a hint of possibility in Han Li's voice. The yellow-robed man took a deep breath before replying, "Brother Han, if you're willing to help our sect, our ghost spirit sect will vacate the state of you and leave it to the other sects. All we want now is to ensure the survival of our sect. In return for your assistance, we've brought along a few presents. We hope that they would be of interest to you, Brother Han." He then patted the storage pouch hanging from his waist, and a burst of white light radiated from within. Spiritual light swept toward the table before him, and 3 items appeared on the tabletop. Han Li examined the 3 items with an indifferent expression to find that they were a crimson bracelet, a porcelain vial, and a green wooden box. Han Li raised his hand and feigned a grabbing motion, upon which the 3 items flew through the air and landed in his grasp. At this moment, Xianxia's pleasant voice suddenly sounded. "The porcelain vial contains the sacred medicine of our sect, the blood limb pill. The pill has no other effect aside from its incredible ability to replace lost limbs. Even if a limb is completely dismembered, an identical one can be regrown after taking these pills. Due to the fact that the medicinal ingredients for these pills are very difficult to find, our sect only has around a dozen of these pills, and 3 of them are in that vial. The red bracelet is a lesser-known devilish treasure and was something that was carried by all the past sect leaders. However, the treasure was withdrawn by Elder Zhong after sect leader Wang perished in the Devil Fall Valley. This devilish treasure is quite unique in that it's unable to directly attack the enemy, but you can nurture things like yin spirits and blood ghosts within the bracelet. Those beings can become more powerful at a rapid rate through the help of the blood qi absorbed by this bracelet, then be released to assist you in battle. As for the item in this wooden box, it's the most precious among the 3 treasures here." At this point, Xianxia paused and looked at Han Li with a peculiar gleam in her eyes. However, Han Li's expression remained completely unchanged, seemingly entirely disinterested in the 2 treasures placed before him. Xianxia heaved a faint internal sigh, but she maintained a calm expression as she continued, "I heard that you're using a wood attribute cultivation art, Brother Han. The item in this box is a legendary wood spirit bead, one of the 5 elemental spirit gathering beads." Han Li's expressionless facade immediately crumbled as he exclaimed, "Spirit gathering bead? You're referring to the treasures that absorb a certain type of 5 elemental spiritual qi while also repelling other types of spiritual qi?" "That's right. The spirit gathering bead has a very similar name to the basic spirit gathering formation, and both of them serve a similar purpose. However, I trust that Brother Han is aware of the differences in their efficacy, so I won't elaborate on that subject. As for how this item compares with spirit well objects, as long as the cultivation art you're using is of the same attribute as this spirit gathering bead, normal spirit well objects won't even be able to hold a candle to this bead," Xianxia said in a slow voice. Han Li's lingered on the green wooden box for a while longer, but there was a yellow restriction talisman plastered over it, so he wasn't able to glean its contents. All of a sudden, he opened his mouth and gently exhaled toward the wooden box. A burst of azure light immediately swept over the surface of the box, and the restriction talisman was detached. At the same time, his hand shot forth like lightning, pointing a finger directly at the lid of the box. The wooden lid flew off of its own accord. Chapter 1197. Spirit Gathering Bead. The faint fragrance of grass and wood immediately wafted toward Han Li. The interior of the wooden box was filled with shimmering green light, and there was a thumb-sized green bead that was sitting in the box amid the light. Han Li swept his spiritual sense toward it to find that the bead wasn't made of stone nor wood, and he couldn't identify what kind of material this was. As soon as the bead was revealed, rich wood attribute spiritual qi immediately filled the surrounding area. After taking a deep breath, Han Li felt as if he had been completely reinvigorated. Han Li picked up the bead between his fingers and stared at it for a while before turning to Xianxia with a calm expression. This is indeed a spirit-gathering bead. Some of these beads appeared during ancient times, and it's unknown whether they were naturally forming treasures or artificially refined. It's been a long time since one of these has appeared in the cultivation world. I didn't think your sect would have one. Fair Yang, is your ghost spirit sect really willing to give me such a valuable treasure? If a cultivator using a wood attribute cultivation art were to carry this bead during their cultivation, they would be able to cultivate more than twice as fast as a normal cultivator. This bead is indeed an extremely rare treasure in the human world, but our sect is still more important to us in comparison. Furthermore, as I'm sure you're aware already, Brother Han, our ghost spirit sect barely has any wood attribute cultivation arts, so this treasure is not very useful to our sect. As such, it's much wiser for us to offer it up in exchange for a chance at survival, Xianxia replied with a serious expression. This spirit-gathering bead is indeed very useful to me. However, if you want me to step in and protect your sect, the ghost spirit sect has to do something else for me as well. Otherwise. Han Li shook his head as his voice trailed off. The yellow-robed man's eyes lit up as he asked urgently, "What is it?" As long as it's within the capabilities of our sect, we'll be sure to do our best. Han Li turned to the yellow-robed man and elaborated, "I don't care about anyone else from the Wang family, but I don't want to see Wang Chan ever again. I have no interest in stepping in to save an enemy of mine. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Elder Zhong's expression changed upon hearing this, and Xianxia's features paled in response. The yellow-robed man had also fallen silent, but he didn't appear to be very surprised by this demand. "I understand what you mean, Brother Han. This is not an issue. What do you think, Senior Marshal Brother Zhong?" The yellow-robed man turned to the elderly man. A conflicted look appeared on the elderly man's face, and he only heaved a faint sigh after a period of contemplation as he replied, "If Brother Han insists, then I'm sure Marshal Nephew Wang Chan will be willing to give his all for the sake of the sect. Seeing as Senior Marshal Brother Zhong doesn't have any objections, then I'll agree to this request on behalf of the sect." The yellow-robed man nodded without any hesitation. Throughout this entire process, he didn't ask for Xianxia's opinion, nor even take so much as a single glance at her. Xianxia's face was quite pale, but she didn't state any objections. "All right, I'll accept your presence, and I'll write a few letters in person to the controlling spirit sect and the other sects." Han Li nodded in response. The yellow-robed man was ecstatic upon hearing this. The trio from the ghost spirit sect had achieved the objective for their trip, so they didn't wish to remain in the drifting cloud sect any longer, and they rose to their feet before bidding farewell to Han Li. Han Li made no effort to keep them, and merely looked on as the three of them departed. Xianxia was the last one to exit the hall, and her footsteps suddenly faltered as she reached the entrance of the hall. She turned to look at Han Li with a complex expression and opened her mouth, but didn't say anything in the end. A resigned sigh escaped her lips and she turned away again before exiting the hall. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and he also fell silent as he turned his gaze toward the three treasures on the table. After the three ghost spirit sect cultivators left the drifting cloud sect, they immediately rose into the air as streaks of light. Not only after they had departed from the Dream Cloud Mountains, Elder Zhong heaved a faint sigh and turned to the yellow-robed man beside him as he asked, "Junior Marshal Brother Yang, do we really have to kill Marshal Nephew Wang?" "Senior Marshal Brother Zhong, I don't want to have to do this, either, but Han Li is specifically requesting for his death, and we can't afford to hesitate here. Besides, he's not asking for us to eradicate the entire Wang family, and Senior Marshal Brother Wang has more than one son, so the Wang family won't fall here. This is already a very lenient condition. After all, the Wang family has wronged him greatly in the past, and I heard that Wang Chan had almost killed him back when he was yet to reach the nascent soul stage. In that case, it really is no surprise that he's asking for Wang Chan to be killed. In my opinion, We should also banish all of our sect disciples from the Wang family as a gesture to demonstrate our sincerity. Even though Han Li has promised to help us, it would be disastrous if he were to change his mind, the yellow-robed man replied. A hesitant expression appeared on the elderly man's face upon hearing this. The yellow-robed man then turned to Xianxia, who had remained silent this whole time, and said in an apologetic manner, "Xianxia, I'm sorry that this has to happen, but I'm sure you had already anticipated this back when you were engaged to Wang Chan. Thankfully, you've reached the nascent soul stage now while Wang Chan has failed to do so, so he doesn't deserve you anyway. Furthermore, the Wang family suddenly attacked our Yang family back then, and all of the high-grade cultivators from our family, including you, had restrictions placed upon them. I was fortunate to have been exempt from this as I was cultivating in a secret area, but that doesn't change the fact that the Wang family has betrayed our trust. Seeing as that's the case, there's no need for you to pay any heed to whether Wang Chan lives or dies. I understand all that, uncle, but he's still my Dao companion. How could I bring myself to express approval toward this arrangement? I'm going into seclusion for a century after we return to the sect. There's no need for you to inform me of what becomes of Wang Chan and the Wang family during that time, Xianxia said in an indifferent voice before she accelerated through the air, leaving the yellow-robed man and the elderly man behind. The yellow-robed man could only heave a resigned sigh upon seeing this, while the elderly man continued to remain silent. After a while, Elder Zhong finally conceded, "If this arrangement is beneficial to our sect, then I'll let you do as you please with the Wang family, Junior Marshal Brother Yang. Rest assured, Senior Marshal Brother Zhong, I'll be sure to handle the situation appropriately." The yellow-robed man was ecstatic. The elderly man merely shook his head without giving a reply, and he seemed to be in a rather dejected mood. The yellow-robed man didn't pay any heed to this. He knew that Elder Zhong had known Wang Chan and his father for far longer than he had, so it was only natural for him to display such a reaction. Following his initial rush of excitement, a wistful look appeared on the yellow-robed man's face as he murmured, "I still think it's quite a pity that we gave him the spirit-gathering bead, though." In response, Elder Zhong chuckled coldly and said something that came as quite a surprise to the yellow-robed man. "Do you really that spirit-gathering bead is something that belonged to our sect?" A bewildered look appeared on the yellow-robed man's face as he asked, "What do you mean, Senior Marshal Brother Zhong? Didn't you personally bring out this treasure from our sect's treasure vault?" I'm not sure if this treasure initially belonged to our sect, but what I can tell you is that Old Devil Concord was the one who gave it to me," Elder Zhong chuckled. "Old Devil Concord." The yellow-robed man was even more bewildered upon hearing this. "That's right. Not long ago, Old Devil Concord suddenly came to me and presented me with this bead, telling me that it was something that our sect had once lent to the Harmonious Bond sect. He also implied to me that Grand Elder Han of the Drifting Cloud sect was the only one who could save our sect, and that this would be the best present we could offer to him. Are you finding this difficult to believe, Junior Marshal Brother Yang?" the elderly man asked with a meaningful look. The yellow-robed man's expression immediately changed as he speculated, "Even if this bead really did belong to our sect, there's no way Old Devil Concord would be generous enough to return it to us. Could it be that there's something wrong with that spirit-gathering bead?" "There's nothing wrong with the bead. I've examined it many times, and it's completely identical to the legendary wood spirit bead in any way. There's nothing amiss about the bead itself, either. Otherwise, I wouldn't have heeded his advice and offered it to Han Li." The elderly man shook his head with a serious expression. "But there's no way that Old Devil Concord would do something like this without harboring any ulterior motives. Senior Marshal Brother Zhong, you should have discussed this matter with me first. If something goes wrong here, our entire sect would be doomed." The yellow-robed man was getting very flustered. How else were we going to recruit the assistance of the #1 cultivator in the Heavenly South region? As for discussing the matter with you in advance, would that have done us any good? What other course of action could we take to save our sect? If there was another way, we wouldn't have had to visit the Drifting Cloud sect and put on such a pathetic display," Elder Zhong harumphed coldly. The elderly man's remained furrowed upon hearing this, but he was at a loss for a response. After an extended period of silence, the yellow-robed man could only offer words of consolation to himself. "In any case, we've already given him the bead, so it's too late to do anything now. As long as there's nothing wrong with the bead itself, we'll be fine even if something were to happen." "You're certainly correct about that, junior martial brother Yang. The spirit-gathering bead was a vast renowned treasure even back in ancient times. After so many years, even if something were to happen, we could easily pin the blame on someone else. Besides, even the #1 cultivator of the Heavenly South region identified the bead to be authentic, so any future mishaps won't have anything to do with us, Elder Zhong chuckled coldly. The yellow-robed man contemplated the situation for a while before heaving a resigned sigh as he said, "We can only hope that that's the case. However, in order to be safe, I suggest that we close our sect for 100 years right after our relocation." "That's a good idea, junior martial brother Yang. We'll do as you say." Elder Zhong nodded in agreement. After that, the two Ghost Spirit sect elders weren't interested in discussing anything else, and they immediately accelerated in pursuit of Xianxia. Meanwhile, within a restricted area in the Harmonious Bond sect, there was a humanoid figure sitting on a massive rock deep within the Heavenly Yang Pond. The entire area was enshrouded in thick grey mist, and the humanoid figure murmured to himself, "It's about time that the treasure was delivered to that Han brat. With this wood spirit bead, your rate of cultivation will be drastically enhanced, but when you reach the deity transformation stage bottleneck, he. A burst of eerie chuckling suddenly escaped from the humanoid figure's mouth. Chapter 1198, Sinister Ploy. Han Li sat within the guest pavilion and fiddled around with the wood spirit bead for a while. Just as he was about to stow it away along with the other two treasures, the voice of a small child suddenly rang out. "Fellow Daoist Han, are you really planning to keep this bead?" Han Li faltered slightly before his brows furrowed, and he asked, "Why do you ask? Is there something wrong with this spirit-gathering bead?" There's nothing wrong with the bead itself, but don't you know that spirit-gathering beads are inherently flawed treasures? If you use this bead to cultivate, your cultivation base and magic power will indeed progress at a phenomenal rate, but once you reach a bottleneck, you'll know what the inherent flaw in this treasure is. High-grade cultivators who use this bead to cultivate will find it many times harder to break through bottlenecks than other cultivators. This is because while the bead does increase your rate of spiritual qi absorption, it also blunts your sensitivity toward the other types of spiritual qi. For cultivators below the nascent soul stage, the negative effects stemming from that won't be very apparent. However, for a cultivator like you, who will need to sense all types of the world's origin qi in order to make a breakthrough, this bead is more trouble than it's worth. As such, the spirit-gathering bead is indeed a treasure that's very tempting to use, but in the spirit realm, it's only given to low-grade cultivators with mediocre aptitudes. No high-grade cultivator would ever use something like this, the small child explained in detail. Is that so? So what you're saying is that this treasure is completely useless to me? That's not necessarily the case. If you can find a few rare wood attribute materials, you'll be able to convert this bead into another type of treasure known as the wood birth bead. That bead won't be able to accelerate your cultivation, but after you completely refine it, you'll able to attain the immortal body ability. Even though you'll only be able to use that ability once, it'll save your life in a perilous situation, the small child replied. Immortal body. Han Li was very surprised to hear this. He had been yearning for such an ability for a long time. However, he had only seen this ability present in extremely powerful demon beasts, elder devils, and devilish corpses that had undergone devilification. He had never heard of any human cultivator who had managed to attain this ability. That's right. Each wood birth bead will allow you to unleash immortal body ability once. Following the ability's activation, even if you get decapitated or your entire body gets cut in half, you'll be able to make a full recovery, the small child replied with a chuckle. Really, now? But if I can only use it once, doesn't that make it a disposable treasure? Han Li was quite tempted, but also a little skeptical. Being able to unleash the immortal body ability once will be enough to save your life under some circumstances. Why do you still look so dissatisfied? In any case, the other wood attribute ingredients required to craft the wood birth bead will be very difficult to find in the human world, and it's yet to be seen whether you'll even be able to refine the treasure. The small child harumphed with a hint of displeasure on his face. What other materials do I need? I have a pretty big collection of wood attribute materials, Han Li replied with an unfazed smile. I'll give you a copy of the list of required materials, but if you want me to tell you the refinement method, you'll have to give me some things in return, the small child said in a straightforward manner. Sure. Feel free to tell me what you need, fellow day-oist endless sky. The fact that the small child was making demands came as quite a relief to Han Li. If the endless sky beast were willing to tell him the refinement method free of charge, he would have been feeling quite uneasy instead. After all, even though the two of them had built up a certain level of camaraderie following the lightning tribulation, it was still quite a stretch for them to refer to one another as friends. Thus, Han Li remained rather cautious of the endless sky beast. He wasn't naive enough to think that they were best friends after just a few mutually beneficial deals and exchanges. The endless sky beast was mostly helping him because he was the owner of the Heaven Void Cauldron, and the demon beast was unable to escape from the cauldron, so he had no choice but to appease Han Li to a certain extent. Even though I've successfully reached the metamorphosis stage, I still require some medicines to fortify my cultivation base. I'm sure you'll be able to easily secure those medicines for me, Brother Han, the small child proposed. No problem. Give me a list of what you need along with the refinement method, Han Li replied without any hesitation. All right, when you get back to the cave abode, I'll give you the list of required materials, the refinement method, and a list of the medicines I'm looking for. The small child was very pleased with Han Li's straightforward reply. Han Li smiled upon hearing this before placing the wood spirit bead back into its wooden box, then flipping his hand over to stow all three treasures away into his storage pouch. All of a sudden, a cold light flashed through Han Li's eyes as he asked, Fellow Day-Oist Endless Sky, do you think the Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators were aware of the wood spirit bead's inherent flaw? That's hard to say. From the sounds of it, this bead was abandoned long ago by ancient cultivators, and information about its inherent flaw doesn't appear to have been passed down. If a nascent soul cultivator from the Ghost Spirit Sect specializing in wood attribute cultivation arts had used bead before, then they would definitely have been able to identify its flaws. Otherwise, there's no way to detect anything wrong just from the bead itself. Are you suspecting that those three are trying to prevent you from reaching the deity transformation stage? The small child asked. Han Li stroked his chin and deduced, that was my initial thought process, but then I realized that there's no motive for the Ghost Spirit Sect to do such a thing. After all, even if I can't reach the deity transformation stage, I'm already a late nascent soul cultivator, and I'll still be the #1 cultivator in the Heavenly South region. Aren't they afraid that I'll identify the flaw in the bead and destroy the entire Ghost Spirit Sect in a fit of rage? There must be more to this story than meets the eye. Let me think about this. The mastermind behind all this who's trying to use the Ghost Spirit Sect against me is most likely a cultivator from the Heavenly South region. But why would it benefit them to prevent me from reaching the deity transformation stage? Even if I don't reach that level, there's still no one in the Heavenly South region who's a match for me. The only downside to this is that I won't be able to lengthen my lifespan, and I'll pass away after reaching around 1,000 years of age. As such, the period of time during which our Drifting Cloud sect will be able to exert dominance over the other sects of the Heavenly South region will be significantly curtailed. However, to normal sects, it doesn't really matter which sect reigns supreme in the Heavenly South region. There are only a handful of sects who can contend for this position, and it's most likely one of the Flowing Mind sect, the Harmonious Bond sect, or the High Zenith sect. Alternatively, it could be all three of those sects joining forces to plot against me. The small child was quite stunned by Han Li's analytical prowess, and only after a long while did a wry smile appear on his face as he said, Now that you put it that way, things have been made a lot clearer. So you think that the other three late nascent soul great cultivators are behind all this? Han Li rose to his feet, and paced a few steps within the hall. He then looked up at the ceiling, and a cold smile appeared on his face as he said, Perhaps. In any case, this is all just speculation. Who knows what could really be going on behind the scenes? I'm not sure if I'm right, either. It's easy if you want to find out the truth. Just capture one of those three, then use a soul search technique on them, the small child suggested with a low chuckle. A sharp light flashed through his eyes, but he shook his head after a moment of contemplation as he said, It would be indeed simple to capture one of them, but that's beside the point. Even if I've hit the nail on the head here, it would be inappropriate for me to attack any of those three sects without any concrete evidence. Otherwise, I'll be viewed as a public enemy. All other cultivators fear and revere me as the #1 cultivator in the Heavenly South region. But if I were to abuse that title, then more people would become resentful and fearful toward me. Maybe someone will take advantage of this opportunity to turn the entire Heavenly South region against me. No matter how powerful I am, I won't be able to stand against the entire cultivation world of the Heavenly South region, and there have been previous instances of something like this happening before. You're way too much of a coward, Hanbrat. If someone tried to plot against me like this in the spirit realm, whatever, it's up to you in the end. As long as you can keep yourself from getting killed, I won't try to influence your decisions, the small child said in a lazy voice. Don't worry, now that I know there are people plotting against me, I'll be sure to be careful. As for this incident, I'll pretend to be oblivious to it for now. If whoever's behind this doesn't try any more little trick, then I'll let them be. But if they try something else, I'm sure I'll be able to catch them next time. As soon as I find some concrete evidence, HMPH, they'll learn what it means to wish they were dead. Han Li's expression remained quite calm, but the menacing threat in his voice was quite apparent. The small child merely chuckled without saying anything this time. Han Li remained within the hall for a while longer before finally exiting the guest pavilion. He then turned his gaze toward another nearby pavilion, and his brows furrowed slightly. He could understand Han Yunji coming to find him, but what business did Xianxia have with him? He was not on good terms with the latter of these two women. Xianxia was extremely beautiful, but she had left him with quite a negative impression. However, there was also something else that Han Li was confused about. He had once heard from a harmonious Bond sect disciple that after Xianxia had reached the core formation stage, she had deployed people to search for him for a period of time. Why was that? Han Li looked at the pavilion with a hesitant look, but still decided to make his way toward it in the end. After entering the pavilion, he was greeted by the sight of two beautiful female cultivators, one of whom was standing while the other was seated in a chair, and both of them were completely silent. The one in the chair was a yellow-robed woman with a set of gentle features, making her appear very warm and approachable. The one who was standing was an extremely seductive white-robed woman who gave off an air of frailty. However, that sense of fragile vulnerability evoked within the onlooker the urge to protect her, thereby further contributing to her allure. Han Li's arrival immediately drew the attention of the two female cultivators. I'm quite surprised that you two came to visit me, fellow Taoists. We're all old acquaintances and seeing you two evokes many past memories in me. Han Li approached the two women with a faint smile on his face. A hint of elation appeared in the yellow-robed woman's eyes at the sight of Han Li. She hurriedly rose to her feet, but was seemingly at a loss for what to do as she said, "Brother Han." "No. Senior Han, I hope my visit isn't causing any trouble for you." Chapter 1199, Woodbirth Bead. As for the white-robed Xianxia, her vibrant red lips moved a few times, but she didn't say anything in the end. However, the expression on her face was slightly complex, seemingly a mixture of excitement and joy, as well as hints of distance and resentment. "I'm overjoyed to see you here, fellow Daoist Han. It's certainly not too much trouble for me at all. You don't need to refer to me as senior this or senior that, either. Just call me Big Brother Han. You seem to have reached the mid-core formation stage already. Looks like it won't be long before you progress to the late core formation stage," Han Li greeted with a smile. The yellow-robed woman blushed slightly before nodding her head with elation upon hearing this. "We've come here to thank Big Brother Han for sparing my life on 2 separate occasions. If another cultivator had been in your shoes, I would have most likely died twice already," Han Yunji said in a grateful voice. Han Li faltered initially upon hearing before bursting into laughter. "Looks like you've recovered all of your memories surrounding the trial by blood and fire, and you're aware that I was responsible for what happened next." Han Li was unconsciously regarding this woman as something like his little sister, and Han Yunji also harbored similar feelings toward Han Li. As such, they were only a few sentences into their conversation, but she had already forgotten Han Li's current lofty status and was speaking to him in an intimate manner as if he really were her elder brother. As their conversation progressed, the two of them began to talk about the Great South meeting and the trial by blood and fire, and both of them were filled with nostalgia. Back when they had attended this meeting, neither of them could have imagined that they would be standing where they stood today, 200 to 300 years down the track. At the time, they had to look up to even foundation establishment cultivators. All of a sudden, a thought seemed to have occurred to Han Yunji, and she abruptly turned to Xianxia with a smile as she said, "By the way, I met this big sister Dong during the ceremony. I heard that she was once a member of the same sect as Big Brother Han, and she has something she wants to speak to you about." Fairy Dong and I did indeed once both cultivate in Yellow Maple Valley. However, it appears that your cultivation base hasn't progressed in the slightest since I last saw you, fellow Daoist Dong. Only after hearing Han Yunji's words did Han Li turn to Xianxia with an indifferent expression. Xianxia's face suddenly became quite flush, and she gritted her teeth with fury as she retorted, "It's all because of you that I became like this." Han Li was completely bemused. Han Yunji also blinked with befuddlement in her eyes. Han Li soon came to his senses, and was naturally unhappy to hear this. As such, his expression darkened as he asked, "What do you mean by that, Fairy Dawn? How could your stalling cultivation base have anything to do with me? If it weren't for the fact that you became an inner demon of mine, how could I have tried and failed to make breakthroughs on so many occasions? It's all because of you that I'm still stuck at the mid-core formation stage even after all these years." Xianxia's rage seemed to have also made her forget Han Li's current identity, and she began to vent all of her fury and frustration. "Inner demon." Han Li murmured to himself with a hint of bewilderment on his face. "Back when I was at the Yang Clan fortress, I was abducted by Qian Buke, and forcibly taken back to the Harmonious Bond sect. Only then did I discover my true lineage. It turns out that I'm a directly lineal descendant of the Harmonious Bond sect's old Devil Cloudpart. It was only through an accident that I ended up becoming a disciple of the Yellow Maple sect. Before I was even born, old Devil Cloudpart used a secret technique known as the Graceful Dream Art on me, which is a cultivation art related to cultivation and bewitching charming techniques. The cultivation art would significantly enhance my rate of cultivation, yet the easiest, but also the most difficult obstacle for cultivators using this cultivation art would be the trial of the inner demons. If it turned out to be easy, then the obstacle would be virtually non-existent and I'd progress as easily as eating food or drinking water. However, if it proved to be difficult, then I could be impeded by my inner demons for the rest of my life, in which case my cultivation base would never progress. In fact, there have even been precedents in other cultivators using this cultivation art, where their inner demons have been too strong and their cultivation base had even been forced to regress as a result. Xianxia spat through gritted teeth. After a prolonged flabbergasted silence, a peculiar look appeared on Han Li's face as he asked, "Even so, how did I become an inner demon of yours? I've barely even met you before. How would I know? As soon as I reached the core formation stage, you began to appear in my cultivation as my inner demon. Even though I was able to barely make a breakthrough to the mid-core formation stage by recruiting some external assistance, I haven't been able to progress ever since. I have to overcome the obstacles posed by my inner demons before I can continue to make progress." I also asked old Devil Cloudpart about this, and he told me that the reason you became my inner demon was most likely because you used some kind of special cultivation arts in the past, and was immune to my bewitching charming techniques as a result. After that, when I was abducted and suffered backlash from my own bewitching charming technique, you left too strong of an impression in my heart, thereby becoming my inner demon. Han Li was completely speechless. Han Yunji was also completely bewildered. After a long while, Han Li finally managed to compose himself. A cold light flashed through his eyes as he asked, "I heard that you once deployed some people to search for me right after you progressed to the core formation stage. If you had found me, how are you going to take care of your inner demons? How else does anyone overcome their inner demons? They either have to do so by sheer force of will or destroy the subject responsible for the manifestation of their inner demons. Alternatively, at the time, I wanted to employ the latter of those two methods." Xianxia was stuttering slightly as she spoke, and a blush suddenly appeared on her face, further enhancing her seductive charm. Han Li's eyes narrowed initially upon hearing Xianxia's words, but after listening to everything she had to say, a surprised look appeared in his eyes. A thought then seemed to have occurred to him, and a slightly awkward expression surfaced on his face. He was silent for a moment before asking, I know why you're here now. You want me to use my spiritual sense to pass my secret technique onto so you can overcome your inner demons, right? Xianxia had also recomposed herself as she willingly admitted, that's right. I wanted to request for your help during the Mulan invasion, but at the time, you'd already progressed to the nascent soul stage, and I hesitated to approach you, thus missing out on that opportunity. What makes you so sure that I would help you, fellow Daoist Dong? Han Li asked with a faint smile on his face. You're already the #1 cultivator in the Heavenly South region, so I don't know if you'd be willing to help a lowly core formation cultivator like me, either. However, if I want to have any chance of reaching the nascent soul stage, then this is my only hope, Xianxia replied with an indignant look in her eyes. I know that we aren't exactly on good terms with one another, but we were once both disciples of the same sect, and your inner demon did stem from me. Helping you out here won't be a difficult task for me, so I can lend you my assistance on this occasion, Han Li said in a slow voice. Really? Xianxia was elated to hear this. It would be easy for my current self to help you overcome your inner demon. Why would I lie to you? However, after this, the two of us will no longer have anything to do with one another. Don't expect me to lend you any further assistance in your cultivation, Han Li warned. Xianxia's face paled upon hearing this, and she was silent for a moment before replying expressionlessly. I'm already extremely grateful that you're willing to help me just this once. I wouldn't dare to dream of troubling you any further. All right, take a rest here for 3 days, fellow Daoist Dong. 3 days later, I'll come back here and help you overcome your inner demon, Han Li replied calmly. Xianxia nodded in an aloof manner and refrained from speaking any further. After that, Han Li and Han Yunji chatted for a while longer before he departed from the pavilion. 5 days later, Xianxia and Han Yunji departed from the Drifting Cloud sect one after the other, returning to their respective Controlling Spirit sect and Harmonious Bond sect. After receiving Han Li's help in overcoming her inner demons, Xianxia would encounter no further impediment during her attempt to progress to the late core formation stage. Meanwhile, Han Yunji received many treasures and pills from Han Li, and he also entrusted her with a letter addressed to the Grand Elder of the Controlling Spirit sect. When Han Li descended in front of his cave abode as an azure streak of light, there was a young woman in a white palatial dress waiting for him with a smile on her face. As soon as Han Li arrived, she asked in a gentle voice, "Why did little sister Yunji leave so soon? You could have asked her to stay for a few more days." "There's no need for that. Spending a few days here with me is enough for her." Han Li shook his head with a smile. "By the way, I just received some news about your other soulmate, that Violet Spirit Woman. She reached the nascent soul stage several years ago, and has since embarked on a journey to the Great Jin. You probably won't be able to see her for a while," Nangong Wn said with a hint of a smile on her face. Han Li smiled, and replied, "With Violet Spirit's aptitude, it's no surprise that she was able to progress to the nascent soul stage. As for whether she's here in the Heavenly South region or not, that's completely inconsequential. We'll naturally meet again if we're fated to do so. Also, I'm getting some tool refinement materials sent here in a few days, and I plan to go into seclusion after that. I want to get to the pinnacle of the late nascent soul stage as quickly as possible, then completely master the Great Development Technique. After that, I'll fuse the 5 types of glacial flames with the unbroken Sanct Devils." "Sure. I was just thinking about making a breakthrough to the late nascent soul stage as well. Hopefully, we'll both have achieved our objectives when we come out of seclusion." Nangong Wan nodded with a gentle smile. "Haha, I certainly hope that would prove to be the case. However, in the days before I go into seclusion, you'll have to keep me company in my lonely nights." A sinister look suddenly appeared in Han Li's eyes as his eyes roamed over Nangong Wan's sensitive regions. "When did you become such a smooth talker?" Nangong Wan scoffed with a deep blush on her face, but the amusement in her eyes was quite apparent. "This is the first time anyone has called me a smooth talker in my life. You're probably the only one who'll get to see my smooth talking side." Han Li threw his head back and chortled heartily as his laughter echoed throughout the interconnected peaks. Within the cave abode on another peak, a young girl was reading a jade slip in her hand, and her concentration was broken by Han Li's raucous laughter. A sweet smile also appeared on her face before she turned her attention back to her jade slip.